Howard Fletcher adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and stared out the window of his third-floor office, watching the gray rain fall over the massive shipping terminals of the Port of Seattle. In the distance, massive orange cranes stood like metal giants against the overcast sky, unloading container ships that had traveled thousands of miles across the Pacific Ocean. Below him, the container yard was a maze of stacked shipping containers and maneuvering semi-trucks, a physical manifestation of global commerce. Howard turned back to the glowing monitors on his desk, where the digital dashboard of the automated commercial environment lay open. This system, the official portal of United States Customs and Border Protection, was the silent digital heart of Horizon Logistics. For 15 years, Howard had lived and breathed the complex, unforgiving world of federal import regulations, harmonized tariff schedule, classifications, and customs bonds. He was 48 years old, a man whose entire career was built on precision, patience, and an absolute adherence to the rule of law. While the sales executives at Horizon Logistics drank expensive bourbon with retail clients, wore tailored suits, and bragged about their shipping volumes in noisy town halls, Howard worked in his quiet, document-filled office. He ensured that those massive shipping volumes did not end up seized by federal agents, delayed at the harbor, or buried under multi-million-dollar fines. Howard had joined Horizon Logistics in 2011, back when the company was a mid-sized regional freight forwarder trying to establish a secure foothold on the highly competitive West Coast. The founder, George Davenport, was a tough, self-made veteran of the maritime shipping industry. George was a man who had started the business with a single delivery truck and a rented warehouse, and he understood that in global logistics, a single day of delay at the Port of Los Angeles or the Port of Seattle could wipe out a whole week of hard-earned profit. George had hired Howard because Howard possessed a rare and highly valuable professional asset, an individual customs broker license, number 34,822, issued directly by the Department of Homeland Security. To earn that license, Howard had spent years studying federal statutes and had passed an examination with a pass rate of less than 10%. The exam required a deep understanding of valuation, classification, entry procedures, and trade agreements. Under federal law, specifically Title 19, Section 1641 of the United States Code, a corporation cannot legally operate as a customs broker or clear international cargo for clients without at least one licensed officer actively managing its daily operations. Howard was that qualifying officer for Horizon Logistics. For 15 years, his individual license was the legal foundation upon which the company built its entire multi-million-dollar maritime shipping empire. Howard's Customs Compliance Department was the silent engine that kept the corporation running smoothly. He was a quiet, systematic thinker who kept track of the complex, ever-changing guidelines of federal agencies. He knew that a single incorrect code could hold up a multi-million-dollar shipment, causing a chain reaction of delays that affected warehouses and retail stores across the country. He spent his days and often his nights reviewing manifests, verifying certificates of origin, and ensuring that every single container cleared the port without incident. His greatest professional achievement was the complete restructuring of the Pacific Rim shipping route for Horizon's largest and most important client, Titan Retail. The Titan account was an $84 million annual contract, the crown jewel of the company's freight forwarding business. Titan imported millions of dollars worth of electronics, auto parts, clothing, and seasonal toys from manufacturers across Asia. Before Howard took over the account, Titan was losing millions of dollars every year in port storage and demurrage fees because their imports from Asia were constantly flagged for inspections. Howard spent 6 months auditing their supply chain, registering their foreign suppliers under the Customs Trade Partnership Against Terrorism program, and setting up dedicated bonded warehouses. He reduced Titan's average cargo clearance time from 5 days to less than 6 hours, ensuring that their retail shelves across the nation were always stocked. Because of the complexity and sheer volume of the Titan account, Howard's employment contract included a specific incentive, a 5% commission on the net margin of the Pacific Rim route, payable at the end of each fiscal quarter. For the first quarter of the current fiscal year, that performance bonus amounted to exactly $420,000. It was money Howard had earned through sleepless nights, emergency weekend phone calls to port directors, and meticulous compliance audits. He had saved the company from countless regulatory penalties, optimized its operations, and built a reputation for absolute reliability. He was not a man who sought the spotlight, but he knew his worth. He knew that the logistics network he had built was a delicate, high-stakes system that required constant oversight. He took pride in the fact that, under his watch, Horizon Logistics had never faced a major enforcement action or a customs suspension. His files were always in order, his audits were spotless, and his compliance team was trained to notice the smallest discrepancies. But the stability that Howard had spent a decade establishing began to erode when the corporate leadership shifted, bringing in a new wave of executives who valued speed over legality. The corporate culture at Horizon Logistics changed dramatically in 2021 when George Davenport, the founder, began taking a back seat in daily operations due to his failing health. His nephew, Bradley Davenport, was brought in as the vice president of supply chain. Bradley was 38 years old, possessed an expensive business degree from an East Coast university, and had zero practical experience in the gritty reality of international shipping. He viewed global logistics not as a complex web of legal compliance and port relations, but as a spreadsheet where operational costs could be slashed blindly to boost short-term operating margins and pad his own quarterly bonuses. Bradley was obsessed with corporate buzzwords like synergy, agility, and frictionless operations, using them to justify cutting corners and ignoring compliance protocols. From the day he arrived, Bradley targeted Howard's compliance department. He saw their detailed audits, document verifications, and regulatory fees as unnecessary bottlenecks that slowed down cargo movement. He believed that customs compliance was an outdated administrative chore that could be easily automated or outsourced to cheaper providers, completely failing to understand the legal liabilities involved. In early 2026, Howard flagged a massive shipment of industrial machinery imported by one of Bradley's preferred overseas suppliers. The customs declaration documents revealed that the classification codes had been deliberately altered to mislabel the machinery as agricultural equipment, a clear attempt to evade anti-dumping duties in direct violation of the Tariff Act of 1930. Howard refused to sign off on the customs entry until the supplier provided accurate invoices and paid the correct duties. Bradley was furious. He marched into Howard's office, demanding that he push the paperwork through immediately, claiming that the delay was hurting their relationship with the supplier. Howard stood his ground, explaining that his license, his personal liability, and the company's legal status were on the line. That was the moment Bradley decided that Howard had to go. Bradley did not care about the law. He only cared about his department's numbers and his own ego. He began coordinating with the Director of Human Resources, Sylvia Gable, to build a false paper trail of insubordination against Howard, while also planning a way to avoid paying the upcoming $420,000 commission. He restricted Howard's access to the company's financial databases and hired an external consulting firm to shadow Howard's team, attempting to learn their workflows so they could replace them with automated scripts. The summons to the executive boardroom arrived on a rainy Thursday morning. Howard was in the middle of reviewing a hazardous materials manifest for a shipment of lithium-ion batteries when Sylvia Gable's assistant knocked on his door, her voice quiet as she told him that the vice president and the director of human resources were waiting for him. Howard calmly saved his compliance reports, locked his desk drawers, and grabbed his personal notebook. He knew exactly what was happening. As he walked down the carpeted corridor of the executive suite, he noticed that the atmosphere was thick with corporate hostility. When he entered the boardroom, Bradley Davenport was sitting at the head of the table, tapping a gold pen against a leather-bound folder, while Sylvia Gable sat next to him with a cold, rehearsed expression. The room felt sterile, lit by harsh fluorescent lights that hummed faintly in the silence. Howard took a seat opposite Bradley, maintaining a calm and composed posture, refusing to show any signs of anxiety or agitation. He opened his notebook and waited for them to speak, his years of experience preparing him for the confrontation. Bradley did not even wait for Howard to sit down before he began his speech. He declared that Horizon Logistics was undergoing an operational restructuring and that the position of Director of Global Customs Compliance was being dissolved. He explained that the company was transitioning its customs filings to an external automated logistics platform designed to increase operational speed and eliminate administrative overhead. Howard looked at Bradley and asked if they had consulted with their maritime attorneys regarding how this automated transition would affect their status as a licensed customs broker. Bradley waved his hand dismissively, asserting that the consultants had assured them that the automated platform could handle all entries without the need for a dedicated director. He spoke with the confidence of a man who had never faced a federal audit or had a shipment seized at the border. Howard listened patiently, noting the lack of legal understanding in Bradley's presentation, realizing that the young executive was stepping into a regulatory minefield without even knowing it. Then slid a document across the table. It was a voluntary resignation and release of claims agreement. She explained that because Howard had repeatedly refused to process critical company shipments, such as the industrial machinery, the company had documented multiple instances of insubordination and willful negligence. She stated that if Howard signed the agreement, the company would waive the insubordination charges, provide him with a $15,000 severance package, and offer a neutral reference for his future employers. In exchange, Howard had to waive all rights to outstanding commissions, specifically the $420,000 scheduled to be paid at the end of the month, and agree not to pursue any future litigation against Horizon Logistics. Sylvia spoke with a rehearsed, clinical tone, her voice dripping with artificial empathy that did not hide the predatory nature of the document. She painted the agreement as a generous offer, a way for Howard to exit the company with his dignity intact while avoiding a public termination that could damage his career. Howard read the document carefully, recognizing the standard corporate trap. They wanted him to surrender his hard-earned $420,000 commission in exchange for a pathetic $15,000. If he signed, he would have no legal recourse. If he refused, they would fire him anyway, withhold the money, and threaten to blacklist him in the shipping industry. Bradley leaned forward, his eyes narrowing, as he warned Howard that if he did not sign, he would be terminated for gross misconduct, and that he would personally ensure that every major shipping line and logistics company on the West Coast knew he was fired for insubordination. Bradley pointed out that Howard was 48 years old, and that finding another high-level compliance position with a terminated record would be nearly impossible. The threat was explicit, designed to intimidate Howard into submission by attacking his livelihood and his professional reputation. Bradley believed that Howard would cave under the pressure, fearing the long-term financial consequences of being unemployed and blacklisted in a close-knit industry. Howard did not raise his voice or show any emotion. He slid the resignation agreement back across the table and stated that he would not sign it. Bradley's face flushed red with anger, and he declared that Howard was terminated immediately, effective that very morning, and that security would escort him to his office to pack his personal items. Howard stood up, closed his notebook, and walked out of the boardroom. 10 minutes later, under the watchful eye of a security guard, Howard packed his broker license certificate, his reference manuals, and his private notes into a cardboard box. He looked around his office one last time, feeling a strange sense of relief. As he walked past the open compliance department, he saw two external consultants already sitting at his computer terminals, attempting to access the customs filing system. They did not understand that the login credentials they were using were legally tied to Howard's individual license and security profile. They were typing quickly, unaware that the digital gateway they were trying to access was about to lock them out completely. Howard walked out of the building and into the rain, his mind already executing the next steps of his plan. When Howard arrived at his quiet suburban home, he did not panic. He made himself a cup of coffee and sat down at his home office desk. He pulled his hardware security token from his briefcase, a two-factor authentication device that granted administrative access to the federal customs portal. As a licensed customs broker, Howard's profile was linked to his individual license number, 34,822, and the corporate entity of Horizon Logistics. Under federal regulations, specifically Title 19, Code of Federal Regulations, Section 111.45, when a licensed broker who is the qualifying officer of a corporation ceases to perform those duties, both the broker and the corporation must notify the Port Director of Customs and Border Protection immediately. The law was absolute. Without a qualifying licensed officer, a corporation's authority to transact customs business is suspended by operation of law. Bradley Davenport had assumed that Howard's license was just a credential on the wall, and that the company could continue to file customs declarations using the broker filer code K39, which was hard-coded into their logistics software. But that filer code was legally tied to Howard's personal license. Howard logged into the customs portal and navigated to the broker disassociation system. He filled out the digital forms, declaring that as of May 14th at 11 o'clock in the morning, he had severed his employment with Horizon Logistics. He checked the box to revoke his qualifying status for the corporation's license and submitted formal notification letters to the port directors of Seattle and Los Angeles. He also declared that the $5 million continuous customs bond number 19C000492, which he had executed as the qualifying broker, was no longer backed by his license. The digital paperwork was processed instantly by the federal system. In the eyes of the government, Howard was no longer responsible for Horizon's shipments, which meant that Horizon no longer had the legal authority to clear any international cargo entering the United States. The automated systems of Customs and Border Protection immediately suspended Horizon's active filing status, creating an invisible wall that no automated logistics platform could bypass. Howard finished his coffee, watching the confirmation lights blink green on his screen, knowing the gears of his revenge were now in motion. The moment the federal database processed Howard's submission, a series of automated compliance flags were triggered. The system immediately suspended Horizon's customs bond and blocked all new entry filings. Howard then called Hector Ortiz, the lead port dispatcher at the Port of Los Angeles. Hector was a veteran of the docks who managed the container movement for Horizon's logistics fleet. When Hector answered, he told Howard that the Oceanus Legend, the primary cargo ship carrying 700 containers for Titan Retail, was 3 miles out, preparing to dock at Terminal 400. Hector added that they had 13 other vessels arriving over the next 12 hours, carrying a total of 3,200 containers. These ships were loaded with high-value merchandise, auto components, and consumer electronics, all destined for major distribution hubs. The entire supply chain of Horizon's largest client was floating just outside the harbor, waiting for the green light from customs that would never come. Hector was checking his terminal, noticing that the manifests were showing strange error messages that he had never seen before. Howard informed Hector that he had been terminated by Bradley Davenport and had subsequently revoked his license association and customs bond. He warned Hector that Horizon Logistics no longer had a valid bond or the legal authority to clear cargo. Hector let out a low whistle, realizing the scale of the disaster. Without a valid bond, Customs and Border Protection would issue an immediate red line hold on all incoming cargo. The Port Authority would not allow the containers to be loaded onto trucks or trains. Instead, the cargo would be moved to the centralized examination station, where demurrage fees would accumulate rapidly. At Terminal 400, the rate was $250 per container per day for the first 5 days, after which the fee doubled. For 3,200 containers, the demurrage charges alone would amount to $800,000 a day, not including steamship detention fees and customs penalties. Hector thanked Howard for the warning and promised to instruct his dispatchers to flag all Horizon manifests for manual verification. He knew that the docks were about to become a parking lot for stranded cargo, and he wanted to protect his men from the fallout. Howard sat back in his chair, staring at the maritime tracking map on his secondary monitor. He watched the little green ship icons clustering near the ports, representing millions of dollars of cargo that were now legally locked in place. He had warning Bradley multiple times about the dangers of ignoring compliance, but the young executive had been too arrogant to listen. Now, the rules were enforcing themselves. Howard called his wife, Martha, into the room and explained what had happened at the office. Martha, who had supported him throughout his long career, did not worry. She knew how meticulous Howard was, and she knew that he would not have taken this step without ensuring his own legal protection. They talked about the future, realizing that Horizon Logistics would soon be begging for Howard to return, and they began planning the terms they would demand when the time came. The storm was brewing at the corporate headquarters, and Howard had a front-row seat to the collapse of Bradley's automated empire. By Friday morning, the digital blockage Howard had created had turned into a massive physical gridlock at the ports. The automated clearance systems rejected every cargo manifest submitted by Horizon Logistics, and the red line holds were active. The Oceanus Legend sat idle at Terminal 400, its massive cranes silent, while the other 13 cargo ships waited in the harbor. At 7:30 in the morning, Howard's phone began to ring. It was Bradley Davenport. Howard ignored the call. 5 minutes later, Bradley called again, and Howard put his phone on silent. In his personal email inbox, Howard found a frantic message from Bradley, claiming that the company was experiencing a temporary technical glitch with the customs filing system and offering Howard a $5,000 consulting fee to log in from home and authorize the pending entries. Howard deleted the email and went to work in his garden, pruning his rose bushes in the quiet morning air, undisturbed by the panic that was unfolding in the corporate towers of Seattle and the docks of Los Angeles. By 10 o'clock, the financial consequences of the shutdown were escalating rapidly. Titan Retail's national distribution centers were running out of seasonal inventory, and their retail stores were facing empty shelves. Under their logistics agreement, Horizon Logistics was subject to a late delivery penalty of $1.5 million per day for any supply chain disruption. Furthermore, the contract contained a clause allowing Titan to terminate the relationship entirely and claim a $12 million breach of contract penalty if their cargo was delayed for more than 72 hours. The clock was ticking, and Bradley's automated platform was costing the company millions. The consultants Bradley had hired were panicking, unable to bypass the federal lockouts, and realizing that their automated system was completely useless without a valid customs bond. The corporate phones were ringing off the hook as angry executives from Titan Retail demanded answers, threatening to withdraw their business and file immediate lawsuits that would destroy the company's financial stability. At 11:30, Howard's phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed the private number of George Davenport, the founder of Horizon Logistics. Howard answered, and the old man's voice sounded exhausted and angry. George explained that the CEO of Titan Retail had just threatened to sue Horizon for $20 million and pull their entire account. He demanded to know why their customs bond had been deactivated and why their fleet was frozen. Howard calmly explained that Bradley had terminated his employment for cause to avoid paying his $420,000 commission and had threatened to blacklist him in the industry. He added that Bradley had claimed Howard's role would be replaced by an automated consulting system. He detailed the legal reality, that Bradley had fired the only licensed broker on the corporate charter, thereby invalidating their customs bond and their legal authority to operate. He made it clear that this was not a technical glitch, but a direct consequence of Bradley's ignorance of federal maritime law. George let out a string of curses, shouting that Bradley had lied to him, claiming Howard had resigned voluntarily due to health reasons. He asked Howard how they could resolve the situation, stating that if Titan pulled their contract, the company would face bankruptcy. Howard pulled out his notebook and read his conditions. First, Horizon must pay his outstanding commission of $420,000 via direct wire transfer. Second, Human Resources must issue a formal written retraction of the termination for cause, confirming he resigned in good standing. Third, Howard would not return as an employee. He would only work as an independent compliance consultant through his private LLC for a retainer of $50,000 per month, with a fully guaranteed 12-month contract. Finally, Bradley must be stripped of all operational authority and removed from the division. George hesitated, pointing out that the consulting contract would cost $600,000, but Howard replied that it was far cheaper than the $12 million contract penalty and the $800,000 a day in demurrage fees. George quieted down and agreed, promising to have their legal counsel draft the contracts immediately. After hanging up with George, Howard felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He knew that the corporate machinery was completely paralyzed, and that the board was scrambling to meet his demands. The power dynamics had shifted entirely. Bradley's arrogance had cost the company millions in a single day, and the board had no choice but to pay Howard's price to save the business. Howard went back to his garden, enjoying the peaceful afternoon with Martha, knowing that his years of dedication to compliance had given him the ultimate leverage. He had played the game according to the rules, and the rules had declared him the winner. The corporate lawyers would spend the night drafting the agreements, and by the next morning, Bradley would have to face the consequences of his actions in front of the entire executive board. By Saturday morning, the wire transfer of $420,000 had cleared in Howard's bank account. He dressed in his best charcoal gray suit, grabbed his briefcase, and drove to the Horizon corporate headquarters. The executive floor was silent but filled with tension. In the boardroom, George Davenport sat with the company's lead corporate counsel and Cynthia Gable. Bradley Davenport sat in the corner, staring at the floor, his previous arrogance replaced by complete humiliation. The corporate counsel handed Howard the settlement agreements and the consulting contract. Howard reviewed the documents carefully, verifying that the financial terms were correct and that Bradley's removal from operations was legally binding. Once satisfied, Howard signed the contracts, and Cynthia Gable notarized the signatures. She stamped the papers with trembling hands, unable to look Howard in the eye, realizing that her own role in the wrongful termination had been documented and exposed to the founder. George then turned to Bradley and ordered him to apologize. Bradley swallowed his pride and mumbled an apology to Howard, acknowledging that his decisions regarding the compliance department were incorrect. Howard accepted the apology calmly, noting that compliance is the very foundation of global logistics. George then informed Howard that Bradley was being reassigned to the company's commercial real estate division in Idaho, with no access to their logistics or compliance networks. Furthermore, George declared that the port demurrage fees incurred over the last 2 days, which totaled $1.6 million, would be deducted directly from Bradley's family trust distribution. The young executive who had tried to steal Howard's commission had ended up costing himself his career, his position, and over $1.5 million of his own family inheritance. He would spend his days managing empty warehouses in Idaho, far away from the shipping lanes and the corporate boardrooms he had tried to control. Howard opened his briefcase, pulled out his laptop, and logged into the customs portal using his hardware token. In the presence of the corporate counsel, he updated the corporate broker registration, reassociating his individual license number, 34,822, with Horizon Logistics and reactivating the $5 million continuous customs bond. Within minutes, the automated systems of Customs and Border Protection processed the update, and the red line holds on the 14 cargo vessels began to dissolve. Howard's phone vibrated with a text message from Hector Ortiz, confirming that the container yard was moving and the trucks were lining up to clear the backlog. The digital gate had been reopened, and the massive flow of international trade was restored. The corporate counsel let out a sigh of relief, realizing that the company had been saved from immediate bankruptcy at the very last minute. Howard packed his laptop and walked out of the boardroom. As the elevator doors closed, he felt a deep sense of peace. He had entered the company 15 years ago as a mid-level manager, and he was leaving as an independent consultant, making $600,000 a year for a fraction of the work, with the absolute authority to run the compliance department on his own terms. He drove out of the corporate parking structure, leaving the corporate battlefield behind. The global supply chain was built on a foundation of laws and licenses, and Howard had proven that the quiet professionals who hold those licenses are the ones who control the switch. He knew that Bradley would never forget the lesson he had learned, and that the compliance department would never be treated as an obstacle again. The quiet man had won, and the system had worked exactly as designed. As Howard drove home along the highway, the rain finally began to clear, revealing a pale blue sky over the Puget Sound. He tuned his radio to a classical music station and let the music wash over him, feeling the tension of the past few days melt away. He was no longer bound by the daily corporate grind, no longer subject to the whims of incompetent executives or the stress of quarterly margins. He was an independent authority, respected and highly compensated, with his professional integrity completely intact. He thought of his team back at the office, knowing that they would now work in a department that was legally protected from executive interference. When he arrived at his house, Martha was waiting for him with a bottle of champagne. They toasted to their future, realizing that sometimes the best way to move forward is to let the rules do the fighting for you.